NATO, I think, will have to fundamentally reassess its strategy for the war in Ukraine. This has become now a global conflict, unfortunately.
I thought we could move on to talk about something that is really emerging over the last few weeks, which is North Korea's involvement in this conflict. South Korea's intelligence agency says a force of 1,500 North Korean soldiers has arrived in Russia's Far East in preparation for deployment in Ukraine. What do you know of this information, and how likely do you think it is that they will be deployed on the front lines?
Well, I think there's some corroborating evidence there. I mean, South Korean intelligence agencies are pretty good, as are the Ukrainians. Both of them believe this is going to happen. There is some video evidence that there are North Korean soldiers either on their way or actually in Russia. I mean, there's also evidence that the North Koreans have had people in the Donbass for some time doing reconstruction operations. They've provided munitions. So I think, whilst we can't say it's an absolute certainty until we see these people on the front lines or at some area in Ukraine, there's a very strong possibility that within the coming weeks we will see North Koreans in Ukraine and potentially in combat against Ukrainian soldiers.
What do we know about whether Russians and the Russian military, I suppose, speak any North Korean, or whether North Koreans and their military speak any Russian? Because, of course, communication is so vital on the front line.
Well, I think it's very unlikely that many Russians, particularly soldiers and junior leaders, speak North Korean. I mean, most of them don't even speak Ukrainian, and that's their next door neighbour, and it's a similar language, not the same. So I think this will be an issue for both the Russians and the North Koreans. They're certain to have translators, but in the heat of battle, when you're on the radio and you speak two different languages and you don't have a translator, that is a major issue. If you need to coordinate support such as artillery, fire support, or just have your friends stop shooting at you in a blue-on-blue kind of incident. So I think that will be an issue. It's been an issue for Ukraine throughout this war. I mean, Foreign Legion people who don't speak Ukrainian, that is an issue. The differences in doctrine between NATO and Ukraine has been an issue. So, this is far from a new challenge. Countries, even like Australia and the US, still have challenges sometimes working together. We speak the same language and have worked together for nearly 100 years. This will be a significant challenge for the North Koreans and the Russians.
In terms of what kind of troops they're sending, what kind of people North Korea is sending, South Korea has claimed that among them is a man called Ri Song-jin, a missile technician who oversees the performance of KN-23 missiles from North Korea that they are supplying to Russia for use in Ukraine. What do we know about these missiles and the significance of sending a technician of that nature over into Russia?
Well, I assume that they would have done this already, given that they're providing munitions and missiles to Russia over the last few months. Given that there have been flights between Russia and North Korea, I find it hard to credit that the North Koreans haven't already done this. So I'd say it would be very likely that they're sending all kinds of specialists, not just to help Russia with the North Korean missiles, but to learn the technical lessons of modern war, the use of electronic warfare, the use of drones, the tactics for combining drones, ballistic and cruise missiles in attacking Ukraine. So they will be sending a whole range of, I think, different specialists, from artillery to armour to special operations to infantry, to learn the wide array of different lessons that it's possible to learn in this war.
I mean, South Korea's fear is that Russia will be offering something to North Korea in return, and that could be information and technology on, high value weapons and maybe even nuclear weapons. What's your view on the negotiation, the agreement that there must have been, we presume, and South Korea presumes, between the two nations in order for North Korea to be sending troops?
Well, I think if we have there'll be a scale of more likely to least likely in the kind of return that Russia will provide. I think most likely will be things like hard currency. That's one thing the North Koreans are always short of. They will get it as payment for the use of these soldiers, but also in the wages of North Koreans that are already working in Russia, in Siberia, and in occupied Ukraine. So I think that's very, very likely. I think what's also likely is they will expose the North Koreans to the lessons of modern war, both through their personal participation, but through briefings. Likely will be things like transfer of technologies, whether they're drones, whether it is how they've reduced their kill chain times, whether it is how they have trained their own soldiers in different forms of tactics for the war. And I think it's also possible that they might provide the North Koreans with the lessons the Russians have gleaned from exploiting captured Western weapons. I mean, the Russians have a program to capture and exploit every possible Western weapon that's been given to Ukraine, so they may share these. I think less likely is sharing lessons that allow the North Koreans to improve the accuracy and the reliability of their nuclear arsenal and the nuclear delivery weapons. I mean, even the Russians, I think, aren't crazy enough to give someone like Kim Jong-un a better capacity to deploy nuclear weapons. I don't know how Russia would see that being in their best interests. They are a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and I think they would probably think twice about doing that. I don't know that that says they definitely won't, but that's probably one of the less likely technical transfers that the Russians might undertake.
So despite the seemingly very friendly relationship between Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un, you think in Vladimir Putin's mind, he still has that caution when it comes to the North Korean leader?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Australia and the United States are extraordinarily friendly, but they're not giving us nuclear weapons. So, nuclear weapons are a very different category of weapon. Those that have them have international and moral obligations not to share them or not to share the technology. I think even the Russians, for all their brutal and immoral behaviour in Ukraine, still feel some limited obligation not to proliferate this technology. Or, sorry, at least I hope they still feel that.
Indeed. And what about the West's response? If North Korean troops are in Ukraine, how do you think Zelensky may have known it for a while, Ukraine has known it for a while, but how do you think the West will respond as the evidence of this becomes more and more irrefutable? I mean, Mark Rutte, the new Secretary General of NATO, has described it as a major, or rather a significant escalation if this is taking place.
No, I agree with the NATO Secretary General. It's a major escalation because from day one of this war, NATO countries, which includes the United States, of course, have gone to great pains to not have boots on the ground so it doesn't escalate this war beyond the boundaries of Ukraine. Russia has gone there, to be quite frank. It has busted through that, self-imposed taboo that NATO has imposed on itself by bringing in a co-belligerent that will participate in the full range of combat operations against Ukraine on the ground and in long-range strikes. NATO, I think, will have to fundamentally reassess its strategy for the war in Ukraine. This has become now a global conflict, unfortunately. If NATO doesn't want it to further escalate and further co-belligerents to join in, it's going to have to act decisively. It's going to have to shift from sloganeering, like for as long as it takes, to actually embracing a strategy that sees Russia beaten in Ukraine. Whether it does that or not, because of the consensus model in NATO, is another matter. I personally think that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately.
Thank you for watching today's episode of Frontline. For early access to our videos, member-only Q&As and live streams, then sign up for a membership via the link in the description. And for the latest news and breaking stories, listen to Times Radio and follow us at thetimes.com.